So now here we are for the session on design of intended curricula, a hot topic. And I would love to invite Professor Parveen Sinclair, who is going to chair and moderate this session. She's a noted mathematician, a former director of NSERT, and presently professor at IGNOU. She has been involved in conceptualizing, designing, creating CTPM, up to the PhD level course material designing. That's a complete spectrum as far as mathematics education is concerned. A PhD in mathematics from the University of Mumbai. She has worked in the field of the education, research, and training for several years. She is known for her work in the field of mathematics and designing of course material to suit learners of the subject on the distance mode. I welcome you, ma'am, and I request you to invite the rest of the panelists.
So the panel comprises Dr. Hridhaykant Diwan, who will be joining us over the internet, and Professor Dinesh Singh. Please, would you come up? Venkatesh, yeah, please, would you come up? Atmaramanji, Rachel, would you join us, Rachel? So we've already, in a sense, this session has been on from the morning. We're going to only expand the scope a little more, as is pretty clear from the discussion from the morning on. And we're focusing on really the design of the various curricula that have been created across the world, not just in India, and keeping whatever part of the design are the purposes around which these were designed, the aims. So we'll be talking about that. Let me briefly tell you about the people. We will start with Dr. Hridhaykant Diwan, who is, I think, ready to join us from Bangalore. He is currently adjunct professor at the Azim Premji University, Bangalore, and an educational advisor of the Vidya Bhavan Society in Udaipur. He is of course, he has been involved and is currently in developing curricula and materials for teacher education at the pre-service, in-service levels. He himself, of course, is a PhD in physics. And in fact, as we know, a lot of people working in the area of math education actually came with a background of working the other sciences or the social sciences. People with a math background have only come in more recently into this area in India. So I think we will start with Hriday, who has also worked with me very closely in IGNOU on the CTPM that we were talking, that she mentioned when she was the certificate in teaching of primary school mathematics, which Dr. Atmaraman is also involved in. So I think the design, let me remind you, and Hriday, can you hear me? Everybody will present for a maximum of 12 minutes. At 10 minutes, I would remind you about 10 minutes. And after everybody's presentation, we will open up for you to discuss and then come up with any issues that you would like tackled or answered by each other and the panel. That's going to be the design. Is that okay? So as I said, this is just a continuation of the earlier session. Thank you. Hriday, can you come in? Okay, at least let me introduce the next person. We may have to move to Dinesh, I think, if that's okay with you, Dinesh. Okay, so it's not okay with Dinesh, but I shall introduce him. Dinesh has been, we've been kind of colleagues known each other for a long time. He's been at the Delhi University at various levels. Of course, teaching and researching in mathematics and as Vice Chancellor, he devised different curricula for the university. People do know that he's a Padma Shri, which we all know what Padma Shri means. And otherwise, he holds several awards, honorary doctorates, etc. And as part of the Delhi University's initiatives while he was Vice Chancellor, he did something very interesting. A cluster innovation center started, which I think is still on and doing well. It was one of the points that will come up, I'm sure, in today's is mathematics across the curriculum and the interdisciplinary nature of everything, in fact, that needs us to share different areas. So the CIC Cluster Innovation Center is something along those lines at the higher level. So Dinesh, if you would like to, 12 minutes.
Thanks very much, Parveen. It's a delight to be here. I have great fondness for Chennai, and when you add maths to it, it's a double delight. So thank you very much. I know we are short of time and I need to stick to a schedule, but I'm a sneaky guy, so I left my watch behind. But I realized Parveen is far smarter, so she's kept a clock there, and I have 12 minutes. And you know, I'm a married man, and one of the advantages of being married is you'll sort of begin to lose the ability to speak. On the other hand, you become a good listener. So I'm here to listen more than speak. But now that I'm here, let me just quickly add what little I think I can. We're talking about the curriculum, how to develop a good math curriculum, and I couldn't help but sort of be involved in the previous session with the insights that so many of my colleagues brought in. You know, you cannot separate the curriculum from the purpose of why mathematics should be done. And how do you sort of convince anyone why mathematics should be done and how to do it? So those are interconnected. But I start with an axiom. You know, we mathematicians are prone to axiomatize. So let's start with this axiom that God is a mathematician. And because God is a mathematician, mathematics permeates everything around us. And then let's start with another axiom, that each one of us is born with a drum beat. There's a drum beat within. And our challenge in life, our purpose in life is to somehow discover that drum beat and then march in harmony with that drum beat in the real world. And then you begin to get educated. And educated not in terms of a formal sense. The people who found their drum beats, whom I have admired, like Kabir or Faraday or Tendulkar or Gandhi, didn't have any formal degrees beyond basic stuff. Nothing, no school, no university education. But they'd all found their drum beats. Gandhi found his drum beat through pursuit of truth, Tendulkar through cricket, Ramanujan through mathematics, and none of them had formal degrees beyond the school. So, if you accept these two axioms, then our purpose, not just for the sake of mathematics, but for the sake of enlightening our youth and ourselves in the process, is to enable them to find their drum beats. And how do you do that? So you expose them to different drum beats that exist around us in the real world. It's like finding a tuning fork that resonates with your own tune in your tuning fork. And you may have tried these experiments. If they don't, then there's a discordant note that emanates. So you expose them to different drum beats and then something resonates within. And how do you do that? Remember, this is a very practical thing. You cannot sort of make this into a theoretical concept and talk about it on the blackboard. So that's where I tend to agree so much with Mahatma Gandhi, who never commented on anything until he had experimented and drawn real-world inferences from those experiments. And in the realm of Gandhi, he was very well qualified to speak. He set up a school in South Africa, which he ran himself. He set up a university in Ahmedabad, which functions till today. He set up a polytechnic for women at Wardha, on whose governing body he put India's greatest scientists. And then what does he finally say? That what you do with your hands will enter your heart. And so, what does it mean for us? Connect to the needs, challenges, and activities of the world and of society around you. And there are different drum beats. And then you will find something that resonates with you. For Gandhi, it was watching the play, Satyavadi Raja Harishchandra, through which he was exposed to the drumbeat of the truth. But the good thing is, as I told you, that many of these drumbeats have within their core mathematics. And if you draw examples and lessons from history, then we will find the path. And I do not wish to say this is the only path. In the Bahuda philosophy in India, it is said so wisely, Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vedanti. There's just one truth, but the wise approach it in different ways. So here's one way. The use of hands for activities that are connected to things around us in the real world. Let me explain. The theorem of Pythagoras, discovered in India hundreds of years before the time of Pythagoras. Through what? Through practical needs of society. To precise geometrical requirements of area and size and measurement for Vedic sacrificial altars for the fire sacrifices that people needed to perform, connected to Vedic rites. I'm not propounding any religion, please do not misunderstand me. But the theorem of Pythagoras is not only embedded there in the Shulba Sutra of Bodhayan, it's also mentioned in the Satpat Brahman. How and why? And then there are criticisms, it's just an empirical observation. No, there are algorithmic proofs to that. I was speaking to Winlin Li, who's a distinguished Chinese mathematician at the Beijing Academy of Sciences, who told me that the difference between the Chinese approach to these things and the Indian was that the Indians embedded algorithmic proofs into their ideas. There are temples in South India constructed hundreds of years ago that use deep mathematics from ideas of the calculus in their architecture. The thing is, we need to allow our children, our students, ourselves to create curricula that connect to things in the real world. Mathematics has come out of, in India, out of poetry, Sanskrit poetry, 500 years before the time of the Christ. In linguistics, Chomsky discovers so much simply because he knows mathematics and he knows Sanskrit grammar. So we need to understand this, the sooner the better. Connect things, and then let us not look down upon skills. It is through these skills that things come. Newton was a skilled craftsperson. That's why he could conduct and fabricate all those experiments on light, which had a little bit of mass, which then finally led him to do those experiments with gravitation. It's this business of his skilled hands. So was the truth with Faraday. It is always experimentation that leads. We put the cart before the horse by devising all these things like an axiom, define a number, define a function, define a fraction. Who cares? I really didn't understand anything till grade 8. In grade 7, I scored 1 out of 100 in math. And my math teacher wrote a letter to my father that this boy is really, really poor in maths. You need to do something about it. But my father was a wise man. And he didn't do anything about it. In grade 8, I was suddenly exposed to Euclidean geometry. And the world changed for me. So my point is, let us be patient. We devise curricula, we try and compare everyone with the same yardstick. Do not do that. People learn different things in different ways, and you do not have to learn everything. Even if you wanted, you could never learn everything. The great poet Ghalib says, Jana ki kuch na jana, wah bhi ek umr mein. I have learned that I have learned nothing, and it took me a lifetime to learn that. Why are we so insistent that we must teach this and that? Who cares? I hardly remember much of my college mathematics beyond what I really liked. It has made no difference to me. I would still be as bad a mathematician had I learnt everything and remembered everything. And do I care if I'm a bad mathematician? No. What I care about is that I like mathematics. So let us look at curricula from a natural viewpoint. And skills, I keep emphasizing, not theory in mathematics, which now throws light on genetics, has come out of tying knots. The theory of braids, a deep theory in algebra, it comes about braiding hair. The search engine Google is so dependent on skilled programming and the use of undergraduate mathematics in an enlightened way. But do we do that? Our curricula is forever filled with this and that and this and that in an axiomatic way, not connected to the needs and challenges of the world. Only then do we talk in school about the Renaissance painters who were such good mathematicians who brought mathematics into their painting. Never. We talk about geometry all the time. Why is it that I must learn every single axiom-based proof of Euclidean geometry? It's not required. But who do we talk to? That's my biggest worry. I do not know where to go and bow with my head in humility and ask, will someone listen? Why do we burden our children, our systems of education with so much? Newton did not understand anything about what is a real number, let alone the continuum of the real line. He didn't know what a function is, but he got us the calculus. Have we bothered to understand? And the calculus was discovered in India for the same reasons 500 years before Newton. Same reasons. Have we tried to understand? Maybe our children will react to that better, but we don't do that. We always try, define a function, define a real number. How does it matter? Nothing matters as long as you get there. I remember Larry Constantine, the great batsman, once he was playing cricket when he was in his early years, and he hit a shot which went straight to the boundary. His coach said, "Oh, you got your feet all wrong. Watch your feet." And he shot back, "Watch where the ball is." So we need to think about that, get things done in a natural way. Let's not worry too much about the rigors. Let us worry more about what resonates with which child so that it strikes a chord in his drumbeat. Mendel could do what he could because he was a skilled gardener. He brought mathematics into botany through genetics. Have we tried to do that? Is there a single school that has a curriculum that encourages children to breed plants to see for themselves where those mathematical laws lie? They don't. I can see Parveen is about to signal to me, so I'm going to stop here. I'll be ready to take questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that very interesting, inspiring sharing and for sticking to the time, even without your watch. Okay, so is Hriday coming in or can we? Should I move to the next then? Okay. So, Atma Ramanji, could we, let me first, while Atma Ramanji, I met him in the context of, again, the Certificate in Teaching Primary School Mathematics and the Association of Math Teachers of India, which Mr. P.K. Srinivasan had founded with some very interested teachers, and Mr. Atma Raman has been a founding father of that place and continues to be a guide to all the others, members, of which one I am currently. He has authored several books and is a member of the academic committees of both the central and state governments. He helped us at the NCERT also. So, Atma Ramanji.
This is about intended curriculum. Nowadays, neither Mr. Venkatesh nor me can prescribe something. Only courts do that. How many hours of homework, how much of homework, what to do, everything is decided by court. Perhaps this may also happen someday. Anyhow, let us not bother about it. And my problem is already solved. See, in mathematics, a problem is solved if you reduce it to another problem that is already solved by a mathematician. So most of my points have been covered in the previous session itself. Anyhow, that doesn't mean I have nothing to say. I will say something about it. Okay. So, people view mathematics in different ways. And for most of us, mathematics is something to do. That's all. Nothing to enjoy. Something to do. You are given a problem, you have to solve the problem, get the marks, go to the next profession. That's all. That is mathematics for us. Anyhow, we have developed a society which is very happy to say, see, I am very weak in mathematics. So that is a proud thing to say. That is how we have, brought a culture here. And the technology, in spite of technology's impact, which has made simpler nowadays, we stick to very old ways of teaching. in spite of all the best in curriculum. That is our specialty here. Now, what is the reason for this is not the curriculum, not the mathematics, the way it is taught, the way it is, given. That is the problem here with us. Now, look at this problem, for example. It is given by an algorithm, and you are subtracting. My question is, why should I take on the right? I don't know. See, if you ask me suddenly, I will not be able to answer this question. I have to think and then do it. See, without understanding any concept, we are concentrating only on skills. So, the intended curriculum has to take care of these things when formed. Curriculum is certainly not responsible. And curriculum, what is curriculum? It is just like the six blind men of Hindustan. Everybody defines curriculum in his or her own way. They will say, curriculum, okay, see, so many ways of describing. That which is taught in school, a set of subjects, content, a program of study, set of material, sequence of courses, so many definitions of curriculum. Nobody is clear about curriculum. I am talking from the layman's point of view. I am still a layman, I am a retired teacher still trying to learn. Now, the mathematics curricula look very much the same in many, we have compared several countries' curricula, almost same. As he said, same fractions, same algebra, same calculus, everything same, except here and there a little bit of combinations and permutations. But if you look at the vocabulary created by these people who frame curriculum, it is quite frightening. Overwritten curriculum, concomitant curriculum that is more connected with religions, e-curriculum, cross-curricular approach, curriculum framework, these are all vocabulary there. Competency-based curriculum, core curriculum, hidden curriculum, integrated curriculum, activity experience curriculum. My God, so many things. I think I will get exhausted if I list all the things. Anyhow, see the curriculum, if you put in short, you can divide it into three parts, namely intended, implemented, and attained. And we are concerned about intended curriculum. That is what we are talking about. Now our experience, I think Professor Ramanujan has already given, so I am not going to give that. And that is one of the very best documents, that was done in India. The NCF 2005 document is the best document, to my knowledge, which covers almost all difficulties, all possibilities, and all solutions also. So let us not bother about it. So that is, I hope I take it as understood. Now, we want all these things. See, if we want really a good curriculum, the child should be able to enjoy mathematics first of all. That is the first thing to do. If it does not enjoy mathematics, there is nothing to learn there. It's a burden. So we should have experiments, we should have inquiry-based learning, we should have brainstorming sessions. Do we do that? Do we do that in our classrooms? I don't know. Project work, so many things are available. So let us not think about all these things. I will show one or two examples where children could be actively involved in the process if the intended curriculum is really to succeed. Role-playing, outdoor activities, quiz, storytelling, case study, think aloud techniques, all these are possible. But whatever may be the curriculum, see, the main problem with the intended curriculum, intentions are always good, but implementation is the problem. That's the problem here. So these are all possible things which you can do. And there are three different centers: subject-centered, learner-centered, and problem-centered. If you cover all the three together, I think then I will call it life-oriented. I will call it life-oriented. Subject curriculum, it is, I think there is no need to explain all these things. A design which could integrate the merits of all the three models, subject and present in everything. Is it possible? Is it possible for us? If it is possible, and that is the best intended curriculum, I would call. It should concentrate on subject also. It should concentrate on the teaching methodology also. Everything, teacher-oriented, subject-oriented, learner-oriented curriculum will be the best thing. Now, many children think children think there is nothing much new to probe beyond what is taught by the teacher. That's the problem. The curriculum, according to the teacher, is over with what is happening in the classroom. If that is the case, I think the intended curriculum will never succeed. The curriculum goes beyond what is happening in the classroom. Now, we want our learners to see this creativity. This is another new term for the past 10 or 20 years, which is gaining prominence. Creative learning and critical thinking. I asked some participants in a seminar, what is critical thinking? What is creativity? Can you define or can you tell me what you explain what it is? Definition is not always possible, but description is possible. Can you do that? See, many could not do that. We are doing all these things without understanding what is happening. If that is the case, intended curriculum is of no use. So, if you have ideas but don't act on them, you are imaginative but not creative. So, if you want to create something, first of all, you should have ideas, and then also you should work upon it. So, the intended curriculum should give opportunities for that. If you want such opportunities, it should enable children to do some activities which will help them think. We are not doing it. See, for example, this is a very favorite example. I'll be continuing. See, if you, this is one problem for me. Yeah. See, this question was given to some children, and when they were asked to respond, see, in how many ways have they responded? But we would not have done it as teachers. I shared this with many teachers also already. See, if this form of discussion is possible with the intended curriculum, then that is very good. So the curriculum should provide for opportunities to discuss things, to investigate, to come with their own ideas. If that is possible, then we can do that. So there are so many things like this that I have put. So that is not possible because of want of time. I will be reducing all these things. But I just want to conclude one thing. See, if you want the curriculum, the intended curriculum to be a good curriculum, enable children to think, completely change the content, teaching methodology, everything suitably. If you are able to do that, then you are successful. Thank you.
Thank you, Atma Ramanji. Very much to the point of the session and meat for us to think also. Thank you. We now have Dr. Venkatesh, who is currently at the IIT Madras Faculty of Humanities, interestingly. I first knew him at the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, where he was in the School of Computer Sciences. And Then he moved to IIT Bombay for some years before he went on to found his own company, the Sasken Technologies. He is currently at, as I said, IIT Madras, and he also runs My Eye Spot, which he may share some of with us. And he's going to be starting off a very interesting project with the state government. Schools, 100 schools, augmenting their learning at the grades, senior school grades, 10, 11, and 12. So over to you, Venkatesh.
My pleasure to be here. We have had some very distinguished speakers speaking about a number of issues. I am an external, outside person because I have not really been in the education sphere. Though I taught in IIT Madras, I taught in IIM Bangalore and so on, but not really in school education till about 3 years ago when I started voluntarily teaching in some schools. And my wife is a teacher, so I keep talking to her, so that's a different perspective I get. When you discuss with your wife, you have arguments. And she keeps telling me I'm very idealistic and you have to be very practical. So a lot of things that I'm going to talk about today are a response to that in some sense, trying to bring it down to the ground, okay? Try to make it a little bit more practical. And so, you know, the reason I started this company, MileSpot, basically is whether or not to understand whether the innovations that we have today, technology innovations that we have today, can it make a significant impact in the way curriculum itself is designed and therefore make a large impact on learning outcomes? So we are trying to do a lot of innovation in curriculum design and so on. I won't have time to speak about that, but I'm going to talk about some specific issues. Can you bring up the PPT? So yeah, while it's being brought up, I think the issue with the state government that they're trying to change the curriculum, because it's very clear that while we talk at one level about how we should reform curriculum and make it much more creative and other things, in the state government, the thinking is somewhat different. Because if you look at the state government schools, parents are opting to move them out to private schools. They're more focused on the problem of how do you get the state government children to catch up with the rest. It's a catch-up issue, right? They're saying, my children are as good as everybody else, but how do we give them opportunities so that they are able to perform at the same level? Unfortunately, the measure right now is competitive exams. Maybe there should be other measures, but for them right now, the measure is that, because that's the avenue, the pathway to get to success. So how do you make them perform and so on? And so the intervention that we are doing is basically trying to help these children to catch up. And what we found really is that, you know, there is a lot of backlog that comes because people haven't learned 3rd, 4th properly, so it carries over to 6, 7, 8. They don't learn 6, 7, 8 properly, it carries over to 9, 10. They don't learn 9, 10 properly, it carries over 11, 12, then carries on to engineering, in fact. And then eventually when they go to work, it catches up with things. Suddenly, it all catches up with you, okay? So I'm going to present 3 points primarily. The first one is on syllabus. All are practical, very practical points, and it might even be pedestrian compared to what you've heard so far, but bear with me. First one is on the syllabus, and I think the curriculum design has to be much more clear about what it intends with the syllabus structure. I'll explain why. The second part is about feedback. If a curriculum can't give feedback to children, then it's not much use, is what I feel. Because if it's feedback is what is the process through which children actually fix their gaps and learn and move on. So we have to fix that. And the third one is, does it really, what we have discussed already extensively, a number of speakers have spoken already, does it promote thinking? And more importantly, does it promote reflection? Reflection meaning children are able to think about their own learning styles. Does it promote that? So these are 3 things that I want to talk about a little bit. Okay, the first one is on syllabus. Okay, so if you take the syllabus, one assumes, I think the guy who designed the syllabus thinks about the syllabus as a kind of a guideline, right, for what needs to be covered. But how does the teacher see it? When you give the syllabus to a teacher, what do they take it as? And my observation of teachers, starting from my wife and the way she interacts, she's also the vice principal in her school, so what she interacts with the other teachers in her school is that they take it as something that is necessary to do, all right? So they see the syllabus as something that you need to cover in entirety. And maybe if you have time, you can cover a few more things like creative questions, thinking skills, and so on. But for sure, one must cover everything in the syllabus, because that seems to be a kind of a, if you, for example, call the students out for a cultural event, the teacher will immediately respond, saying, but when am I going to finish the syllabus? Or, if you have to catch up, I need to catch up, right? So there is this predominant thought in the mind of the teacher about the need. Somehow their job description seems to be to cover or ensure that the syllabus is properly covered. So that's how the teacher looks at it. But how does the student look at it? If you go to a student and ask the student, what are you studying or what you want to study, and we heard some of it earlier also, they see the syllabus as something that is sufficient, that draws the boundary for what you need to know. In fact, actually, if you give a student a test, the first question that the student is going to come back many times and ask is, what is the syllabus for this test? Right? What's going to be included in the questions for this test? In fact, parents also ask this question, and the teachers also obligingly answer, saying that you can introduce this first proof. There are two proofs. The first proof you can look at, second proof you can kind of avoid. Right? So this reinforces the idea for the student in some sense, and the parents also, that the syllabus is a necessary, that is sufficient. That's all you need to know. You don't need to know anything more than this. And the exam system also reinforces this in a huge way, because you know the weightage by looking at your past analysis of exam papers and so on. You know what weightage different subjects get, and students, they discuss among themselves what needs to be and what does not need to be studied. Right? So they take a subset of what is in the syllabus. But basically what the designer intended was this other circle, that they intended that some part of the syllabus is included in what is taught, and some part of what is not in the syllabus is also taught by the teacher. The teacher applies the mind, creates a lesson plan in some sense, and teaches some part which is in the syllabus. There should be something just mandatory that is definitely covered, but also include other things so that, all the things that we discussed about the curriculum, about making things interesting and joy and so on, also are included in the thing and then taught. But this is not done, primarily because there is very little clarity on what this syllabus thing is, right? So I think when we talk about intended curriculum and communication of this intended curriculum to the teachers especially, one needs to be very clear what should be mandatorily covered, and I presume that what should be mandatorily covered is about 50% of the total syllabus, right? We always think that we are teaching too much. I definitely think that we are teaching too much to children. So about 50% probably is mandatory, and then it gives a lot of space and options. So a number of options in the curriculum need to be given to teachers. You can try this, you can try this. We have tried this with some success and so on. So experiences of different people with trying different options in the syllabus. What kind of variations they made and how it worked out for them. I think this is very important from a practitioner's perspective to allow the teacher more scope to do things. The second thing that I want to talk about is feedback. Okay? Now, there was a study that was done in Europe some time ago, and they found that if you have 100 rupees to spend or some amount of money to spend, where would you spend it on to get the largest impact on learning outcome? Turns out basically that it's not school infrastructure, it's not quality of teachers, of course, to some extent quality of teachers, but not so much on teacher-student ratio, number of teachers and so on, but just implementing a proper feedback system, which means telling every child, right, where the person is going wrong, what is getting right and what is getting wrong, has the highest impact on learning outcomes for the child, okay? And that in our system is done in a very simple way actually, and somehow we don't give that much importance to it. We give students, of course, homework is considered bad now, the court, as was mentioned, is banning homework in first and second standard and so on. But anyway, so let's say the child is given classwork, so given some problems to work on, the child works on it in a book, presumably the teacher takes this book home and applies mind to this, I hope, okay? I've seen them correcting, they don't seem to apply the mind, but they should. And go through the solutions that the child has come up with, circle things where they've got it wrong, maybe write some comments in the margins. This is a feedback, this is a method of feedback, and it is effective. Even just circling steps which are wrong tells the student much more than what the marks tells them. If they get 6 out of 10, what does it tell them? It doesn't tell them anything. But if you put circles around things, it tells them, okay, this is what you got wrong. And if you write something in the margin, it also says what you should do differently. So this feedback, this method of taking books, applying mind to it and all that, I think teacher gets no benefit for doing it, really. Honestly, I've watched a lot of teachers. If somebody who's done a lot of work on doing all these margin notes and all that stuff, do they get any incentives? Do they get any benefits? Do they get any recognition? No. Are their students doing well in the exams? That's what they get benefit out of. So in some sense, one has to first design the curriculum so that there are questions which will make the student to think and write. And when they write, they should they'll probably make mistakes and gives them opportunity for them to. So this is one of the things that we have focused on in Milespot when we develop content. How do we break the problem into steps? And how do we ensure that these steps can be actually commented on? Okay, that's one of the things. Okay, so third thing I wanted to point out basically is about thinking skills. We know that thinking skills is something you can say in abstract, but what does it mean in practice? My experience with trying to teach in some rural schools is that you can include thinking skills very easily by countering intuition. All you have to do is present something which is natural, intuitive, but when they start thinking about it, the result comes out as non-intuitive. For example, you can ask something like this. Is x square greater than y square for x greater than y? Intuition tells us that it should be, because we relate x and y to the sides of a square, let us say, and x square basically means the area of the square. So if you make the side more, area should be more. Of course, one could think as a trick question, okay, let me try a fraction side and all that. Even for fractions, it will work. When will it not work? It will not work when x is an integer, okay, negative number. Now, the problem with negative number is, firstly, we don't even understand what is less than in a negative number. I can bet that if you go and ask even 8th standard students, which is larger by asking descriptive, don't put in numbers, they'll probably think minus 2 is greater than minus 1, because 2 is larger than 1, all right? And we know that in the US, a lot of people seem to think that 1/3 is, right? 1/3 and 1/4, when you compare, 1/4 is greater. They think, actually. We know the story, right, of the competitor to McDonald's, which did not take off, because people thought that 1/4 is higher than 1/3. Okay? So, minus 1 is greater than minus 2, you explain with the number line and all that, you say that it's the right of the number line. But what is square? I can think about a square of a positive number. What is the square of a negative number? I can't visually think about it. It's not easy. Now, I can think about a negative square. That's easy. Take a square, take something out. That's a negative square. But the square of a negative number is such a hard concept, actually. And the point is, it's hard because it's hard even otherwise. If I tell you, for example, I don't think that the student will not be able to appreciate this concept, for example, you would not even know what I said, actually. Did I say that he appreciates it? Did I say he did not appreciate it? Double negative. It's very hard, even in English. So it's hard in maths also, I would say, basically. And now you can try something with even more difficult, like x square greater than x. Right? X square greater than x. Now, the problem with this x square, and I tried this with my son, younger son, who is in 12th standard right now, and he told me, you know, the problem why you can't compare an x square and x, I said, I don't know. So he says, x square is an operator, x is an unknown. Oh, I said, that's interesting. It is true, actually, because when we think about x, we think about it as unknowns. We're taught like that. X is unknown. And then suddenly somewhere x becomes a variable. So when we are comparing x square and x, actually we are comparing two operators. We are comparing identity operator with the square operator. And we are seeing which is better than that. But this is a complicated concept, actually. So I would say that when you take non-intuitive, things which challenge your intuition, that's when people start thinking. When a question has a non-intuitive answer, and one of the big modules that we have created in Milespot basically is on cricket. As was explained, you have to take real-life examples. There's nothing else. Bicycle, cricket, water in the house. These are my examples. These are the things on which I have done all my problems. Physics, maths, everything. Okay? So you can take cricket and explain extremely non-intuitive things that are happening. Very simple non-intuitive things are happening. So thinking starts when the answer to a question is non-intuitive. And I like twisted questions, actually. Though, IIT asks unnecessarily twisted questions. The idea of asking twisted questions is to make the student to fail. That's not a twisted question that I like, okay? I like a twisted question that challenges your intuition. That's a good twisted question. Like, for example, this one, all right? So, sorry, now I'm going to stop, all right? So, we need space for thinking and reflection. I'll stop with that. So, 3 points I'm making basically. First is that we need to communicate the intent of the syllabus if you have to make your intended curriculum work. The second point I'm making is basically that this curriculum has to have space for providing feedback to children. That's the only mechanism children have to catch up. Children have to catch up, which means the weaker students can catch up with the better students. The only mechanism we have. And the third one basically is challenge intuition with your questions. Take questions which are intuitive. In fact, actually trick them by challenging intuition. Make them go down the path of intuition by giving them a problem and then trick them. And that's a good way to get them to think. Basically, this is my 3 points.
Thank you. That was solid practitioner base, and I'm sure your project is going to do very well with all this. Thank you for sharing all that. We now move to... Okay. We can try.
Yes, Praveen, I can. Thank you. Sorry, this connection in the university is terrible. Sorry to have troubled all of you. It's now very, let's go with this phone because it may go any time.
Okay. So you have 12 minutes, Hriday, to talk about your views on...
How many minutes?
12 minutes,
12 minutes, okay.
Internet,
And
you have to
can
ask
you-
Reliance. That I don't know. Okay. Internet is a Reliance issue, nothing I can do about it. But 12 minutes to do intended curriculum design. Okay? Okay.
Okay.
Please, go ahead.
So can I start?
Yes, please.
Okay. So, in terms of designing curriculum, I want to start from basically thinking about some points which are critical. And I've separated them into two parts. One is the part of perspective, and the other part is some pedagogical principles. So I will start with the perspective, and then we can probably, if there are questions, I try to stop in about 8-10 minutes so that if there are, I'm not sure whether I'm going in the right direction. So the first principle principle of perspective is that mathematics by nature is abstract and is based on mathematical objects which are abstract in nature and their interrelationships. So that means that whatever we do in terms of pedagogy, whatever we do in terms of everything else, needs to take cognizance of the fact that you are actually dealing in the end with objects which are abstract and constructs, in some abstract sense. So in that, if we think about that, then using materials as an aid can only be as scaffolds or as crutches. So I'm saying that is in the sense that we do have a lot of importance of using teaching learning materials, but overusing models, including pictorial representations, can also lead to difficulties in conceptualization of the entities and their relationships eventually. The second principle that I think is important is that children do know some mathematical ideas and also some objects in their abstraction. So they begin to abstract before they actually come to the school in some manner. So I think that also needs to be taken cognizance of when you move forward and to newer and newer ideas, then these ideas eventually need to become one stage more abstract than how you start them with in your classrooms. So you need to use, recognize the abstraction, but use real life situations to link with those abstractions in some manner so that there is, in some sense, a conceptual connection the learner can make with whatever abstraction she is constructing in her mind with the other things that she already knows. So, for example, when you are dealing with algebra, then for that, numbers are no longer abstract in the same sense as they were for a class 1 child. Because for that, in that stage, numbers are fairly tangible, concrete entities with some degree of appreciation about what they mean and what are the implications. So when you come to the fact of a generalized number, like where you have just an alphabet which can represent any number, then you move one more stage in abstraction, and so on. So I think in that sense, the interplay of what is concrete and tangible for the child does not really need to be in terms of objects which are which can be handled, which can be seen, which can be manipulated. So I think the notion of concreteness in discipline and mathematics would keep changing, and the initial the concepts which are initially abstract over a period of time become do not remain abstract and become fairly concrete. As the child is able to see interrelationships among them and create new interrelationships with them, so they become familiar and usable by themselves. They are, in the sense, manipulables mentally in the mind of the child. The other things that I think then are more pedagogic principles, we often miss the importance of language in constructing mathematical abstractions, because words by themselves are also, in some sense, abstractions from the objects and the phenomena they represent. So conversations about mathematical ideas where children articulate their understanding, where children try to define mathematical objects and relate them to something that they know already, all that is has to be an essential part of the classroom. Which means that whatever materials that you create, textbooks, workbooks, and whatever classroom transaction processes that you start with, must have space for children to articulate their ideas, present their constructions, and defend their logical constructions about whatever relationship they have thought between entities. It is therefore also important that while you eventually reach a precise construction of a mathematical entity, you start by allowing children to have space for their own constructions in their own language and relating them to their experiences, so that gradually they can become more confident of the abstraction that is involved in fully involved in the mathematical entity. Opportunity to form logical arguments, prove something, describe something carefully with using precise terms, all that will eventually lead to development of the ability to understand the way mathematics works and the way mathematics deals with its objects better. They must also therefore have opportunity to grapple with mathematical language and interrelate it to the ordinary language. So intertranslation between mathematical language and usual language on both sides. And that is important because the use of the precise, sharp language, which is symbolic, also constructs in the mind the ability to deal with larger logical structures and hold more complex ideas and relationship in mathematics. One more point in this is that we must remember that the book has to be read by the student. And, it is not merely a book which deals with numbers and symbols or picture diagrams and constructions. It is basically it's some read and comprehend herself so that she can read more materials on mathematics subsequently. So So in that sense, she has to therefore also form a relationship between the language of mathematics and the language of the book, which will start her from a simpler reading process to be able to read texts which are very dense and symbolic in that form. So as you go from class 3 to class 10, 11, 12, the nature of the construction of the mathematics textbook, the proportion of language and mathematical language, the way you describe proofs, the way you describe objects, that needs to be carefully structured so that there is felicity that develops in the child to be able to use. This we don't often keep in mind when we are thinking of developing materials. And this also would stand for construction of visualizations of three-dimensional objects, symmetries, transformations, because
Hriday, one minute
sorry.
more, Hriday.
Sorry, am I taking too much time?
No, 1 minute more.
Okay. So just 2 minutes can take. So these construction of three-dimensional spaces and their subsequent generalization to more dimensions require an ability to visualize. And I think that also needs to be built in to the program. Last thing that I feel that is critical is that while there must be a lot of opportunity to solve new problems in the textbook, so therefore teacher must also create new problems, they must also have an opportunity to try and construct problems, and that in some sense should be demanded in the materials, that children will construct problems and get each other to solve it and maybe pose them to the teacher as well. So I think that's basically what I would say are some of the things that one needs to keep in mind. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Hriday. Questions will come at the end of the panel's presentations, so you can come back then, okay?
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
Right.
We now have Rachel Horseman. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Okay. She leads the writing and strategy development for the Cambridge Mathematics Group. She has taught mathematics for 13 years in Peterborough, Cambridgeshire, and Hertfordshire, from primary to post-16, including the further math program, IGCSE, and STEP, STEP. She has held a variety of positions, including advanced skills teacher, specialist leader of education, head of the department, and assistant head, working in a variety of contexts, including a high-performing grammar school, a rural comprehensive, and an inner-city school in very challenging circumstances. These roles have included mentoring trainees, NQTS, and subject leaders, leading professional development across schools with teachers and classroom assistants, running local authority training, writing and developing schemes of work and resources, as well as working with a wide variety of institutions and students. Rachel, all yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for letting me speak. I feel a little bit like a fraud stood on stage with such esteemed colleagues because I don't have the academic background. I have been involved in teaching ever since I was about 12 years old, when I started teaching music to my friends because I played instruments and they wanted to learn. And I feel like I've never stopped, but I also have never stopped learning. And it was lovely to hear other people saying the same. I'm speaking from a slightly different context because I work for a project where we are thinking afresh. We started with a blank piece of paper and we were told, if you wanted to start again, what would a curriculum look like? How would you present it? How would you show it to people? Our first question was, well, what people? Who are the people that look at a curriculum? So we had a little bit of a conversation like the conversation you had at the beginning today and saying, who are the stakeholders in a curriculum? And we were then asked, okay, we want you to produce something that will help all of those people have a joined up picture. All of those people have the same understandings. How do textbook writers, curriculum designers, teachers in the classroom, people who are working in policy, people in education research, they all have different pictures. We want you to present them with a picture that they can all look at. They might look at it in different ways, but they're all looking at the same structure with the same base to it. That's how Cambridge Mathematics was born, and we'll tell you more about the big picture of the project later. But my job was to talk about principles. What I'm going to talk about is what we call the framework. And the work that we're doing is producing a map. And one of the reasons we're producing a map is some of the design principles, but it's going to be bigger than a single curriculum. So if anybody's interested and starts contacting us, what we're talking about is something from which you draw a curriculum. Because as we've said, mathematics is endless. How far? Where are the boundaries? Where does it stop becoming mathematics? So we can't show everything, we're showing as much as we can. We're looking at school mathematics from 3 to 19. We're looking at a tool that all of these people can use, and it is a common tool for them. So they're all looking, they're all sharing. I'm going to talk to you about the 4 principles that we identified. The first was connectivity. Now, this came from discussions with maths educators, maths researchers, and we asked, well, what is the most important in mathematics? How should you split the content? How should you present it? And pretty much every single person that replied said it doesn't matter how you split it. It doesn't matter whether you call it number and algebra and geometry. What matters is the connections you make within mathematics, within those established topic areas and areas of mathematics, but also between them. It matters how you connect calculating to geometry to statistics. It matters how you use the number line and you connect it to students working out how to measure a length through pacing off. That helps them construct the number line. That's the most important thing. And that has been absolutely influential in the way that we present things and the way that we work. So firstly, we're not looking at a list of content. We're not looking at a list of a list of unconnected learning objectives. And I think that's a really important thing. We're looking at maximising the use of technology in the way that we represent a curriculum. So this took us through lots of iterations, and eventually we came up with a visual database. And what we are working from in our design tool is a network diagram. I'm going to show you a picture. We can talk about this at lunchtime, and after lunch we're going to talk more about what it contains. But we're working with a whole map that looks a little bit like this. Now actually, those dots, the nodes, are the pieces of mathematics that we've identified, and the edges between them are the connections we've identified. Now, I've just pulled out a few tiny pieces there. You have to imagine a map that has over 800 nodes in it. That's what we've identified so far, and like myself, this is at the start of its use, and it is something that's in development, so this will just grow and grow. I'd like to just highlight a couple of things. We talked today about importance of why we're studying a piece of mathematics, and what we're trying to do within this is connect that knowledge into the framework, and at each of those places on this map we identify what the kind of mathematics is that should be going on, not what's understood, because how do you test somebody's understanding? One day they can answer a question, the next day they can't, then they can't see the connections to something else. But what we talk about is what the kind of mathematics should be going on, and we identify why it's important, where will it lead to, what is it the foundations for? And we've then identified different ways in which you'll work with that mathematics. Some of it, there will be some practice and memorization and performance, but also you're going to do all of those higher learning skills as well. And you don't just do those when you're older. You don't just do those because you're better at mathematics. You do those from the very beginning. Even the youngest children can be given 5 objects and asked to put them in order of height. That's the progress they go through and the way how they do it and how they can talk about it. So that's really important to us. And then we've looked at those edges. How are things connected? Now I use the word how. It's not just that they're connected. How are they connected? What is it that connects me working out how to measure a line using paper clips and me learning about the number line? So we're looking at that. So some of those edges are typical topics. Some of them are bigger ideas. Some of them are structural ideas. Our next idea, our next principle for design, is about initial experiences. And again, this does chime a lot with what people were saying. I heard the mention of the word play. And that for us is absolutely essential, that children get an opportunity to play with mathematics. They get an opportunity to explore mathematical structures, mathematical diagrams. They get a chance to explore the maths in this room. We say to them, okay, what shapes can you see in this room? And whether they use the formal language or not, they're exploring that. And at first they won't use formal language. They'll say, I can see lots of shapes that look like doors. Brilliant. And gradually those ideas are formalised, and gradually they start to recognise those shapes and call them rectangles, and then gradually by investigating those shapes they explore all of the characteristics or properties of those shapes, and eventually they come to the idea that they're going to be classifying them, they're going to be deciding on the necessary and sufficient conditions, but they don't start with those necessary and sufficient conditions. They start with that exploration. So we're trying to give them purpose, and through the communication of that, they need to start having a general common language in which they use to the mathematical language. The initial experiences aren't just about in primary school or lower grades. It also happens much earlier much later on. So it isn't something restricted to young children. All children at all points should have a chance to have some initial experiences. So in secondary school, it might be the idea of looking at spherical geometry. You don't do it formally, but you start to realise that you can draw a triangle that has 3 right angles. Or would you call it a triangle if it's drawn on a sphere? But they have those opportunities. Our next point is transparency. And this comes from, in the UK, a comment from some ministers saying that the new curriculum was based on evidence and research. And when you ask them, what is the evidence and research? They say, trust us, we know the evidence and research, but they don't have the evidence and research to show us. So they don't have any evidence to say why a particular piece of mathematics is in the curriculum, why they should be doing this here rather than this here. So also because we are a university project, we have to be very transparent about the decisions we make. Now, we do that through several ways. One of the ways is we record everything. Our team is quite small. There are 3 content writers like myself at the moment, although we are expanding. But we also have 2 other members of the team who are predominantly in research, and they guide us. They explain to us what kind of documentation we should be keeping as writers. They listen into all of our meetings and they document it. So when we have conversations about, oh, we could do this and we could do that, and I read this, they document everything. So every decision we make is written down somewhere and we can track back. Equally with all of the content, all of those nodes I showed you, every one of those has research attached to it. And because we're using modern technology, we can go into the piece of mathematics and say, well, why does this piece of mathematics exist here? Why is it being constructed in this way? And why is it connected by these things? So we can go there and say, these are the papers, these are the research, and these are the conversations, because we're not just looking at research that already has been written. We're talking to people like yourselves, we're talking to experts in the field. Where we can't find answers, well, that's as valuable as where we can find answers, because that identifies areas that people haven't considered. Now, in those areas, we often have to make our best judgment, and that's recorded. But what we can also do is we can also speak to our wonderful community of maths educators and ask them, well, what do you think about it? And do you know of any research? We can't find any. An example of that is, for myself, I work predominantly in the geometry area, is looking at volume versus capacity. And I don't know from your own curricula, but certainly in the English National Curricula, the 2 terms are mixed up completely, and they are wrong. Well, they're not wrong, because if you look at the dictionary, if you look at the Oxford University Dictionary and you look at the Cambridge University Dictionary, they both give different definitions and they both get it mixed up as well. So how do you design a curriculum where you're talking about volume and capacity? So what I did in that area is I spoke to people who designed the Common Core, people who designed the New Zealand new curriculum, and people who designed the Japanese curriculum. And they gave me information and their ideas, and I digested that. We produce a variety of research papers to justify all of this as well. So there's a whole load of documentation, and the hope is that will help persuade, because this hasn't been used directly with policymakers yet, although they've looked at it, but it can be used as evidence for us to say, you're making the wrong decision, look, this is what you should be doing. It also helps teachers understand. We feel that teachers, making a lot of this accessible to teachers, will help them understand, potentially if they're doing further study or if they have an area where they don't really quite get how the curricula works, they could have a look at these kind of documents to make an understanding. And everything, again, is referenced. So if you want to go into the more academic side of it, you can go along and look. The last one I'm going to talk about is flexibility. We work in very different contexts. you have, I've been learning that in India, the range of schools, the range of communities, the range of situations people find themselves in, the range of teachers teaching, the range of emphasis. We've heard about how, should all children be doing the same mathematics? Should we be offering them different mathematics? And the joy of having a tool like we're working with, where it is digital and you can play around, you can investigate areas, you can delete parts of the graph. You can see if you delete this part of the graph, what happens later on. Or if you want to have this as an endpoint, what do I need to have done earlier along? So it's that flexibility in the way that you can do that. But whatever you pick out of there, if you choose a set within the map, you know it's coherent, you know it's linked together, you can see the connections. You've got the story of the mathematics, and it's not one straight line, it's all intermingled and twisted and joined with each other. But from that, you get that story of mathematics. And because we use a tool that's digital, we can also investigate it in lots of different ways. There's loads of technology involved in being able to tag content, in being able to look at vocabulary, so we have a glossary linked to it, and all of this is in development. So one of the things we do as writers, we often sit down and say, well, actually, that point just there, I want to know how many other points come into it, how many connections does it have? If I ask the computer to draw me everything from behind it, how much would be there? How much does it lead on to? And it's really interesting to us to then put those in different visualizations. Now, some of them are useful, some of them are not useful, and it's a wonderful opportunity to be in the project to do that. So we can look at connections, we can look at key moments and how they're linked together. We can look at those edges. This is just a screenshot of getting a map and saying, okay, well, what are all the edges called? Those are the names of all the edges. And then, well, which edges are shared? Which edges run in parallel? Or which nodes share which edges? Are there overlaps? And we can start looking time-wise. Although we don't attach ages to anything, we have things in a continuum. We can look at, well, where are things happening at the same time? So you'll learn more about the mathematics and the Cambridge mathematics this afternoon, but that's our design principles behind what we're trying to do.
Thank you, Rachel. Thanks for this overview of what you're doing and planning to do. And actually, all of us need to look at these issues and many of us do look at it, maybe not in this very clearly mapped out way. So, we've had presentations, and I think there are several things that have come out as common. And now I know it's the morning also, there were several things that came out as common to the morning and the this first and the second sessions. Right from the time that Dinesh, for example, spoke about connecting with real world experiences and, in a sense, talking about the abstraction levels. But then our real world experiences also, we have a lot of abstraction which we accept. And when Hriday was talking about different stages of learning being different levels of abstraction and linking with the kind of processes we actually use in our daily lives. So through and through we've had these threads. When Atma Ramanji spoke about the different views, that, yeah, there are terms, but then are the views all that different? Sometimes they are. And I think we need to, in India at least, and maybe other places too, but certainly in India we know that what a large part of the society believes impacts the actual implementation and the design in various states also. Venkatesh, of course, has spoken about issues pertaining to that he feels are core for designing of any curriculum. And he's given some issues involved over here, which in fact he didn't mention the RTE Act, which we have, which clearly uses the term completing the syllabus, which is against the philosophy behind which the curriculum has been created. So there's a very obvious anomaly there. And of course, we ended with these issues that are being looked at by the Cambridge Math, which any curriculum group does look at. So there are various issues that have come in, and I would just like to, I think there's a slide that talks about, yeah, this is the slide, right? When maybe we discuss it for about 5 minutes among ourselves, these issues. But then particularly for India, I would like people to also think about our situation, since we're from here largely. The issue of inclusiveness is, if it's a curriculum meant to be inclusive, what do we need to do further, if anything? The mindset of all the stakeholders involved, impacting and the impact of the other related curricula, teacher education curriculum design. And of course, when designing the new one, what kind of feedback do we have of the earlier one? And this I'm talking by experience of when we sat down to relook it. The NCERT got feedback from several sources, which we were working towards putting back into our learning for creating the new one. So I think 5 minutes time for us, and then we start taking comments and questions. If you could kindly not repeat something that's been done in the morning, and maybe bring out something new pertaining to the design, other aspects of the design now. If there is some point that you would like to make, the floor is open. Kindly give us your name and briefly about it.
My name is Bhubalan. I am from Madras University.
Do you have an Aadhaar card?
Dinesh won't listen unless we have an Aadhaar card.
That question is a curriculum more than mathematical content. We have to answer that question. But other question depends upon how we are answering that particular question. I feel that cognitive and psychomotor and affective domains are also involved in mathematical curriculum. There are subgroups in the class. At least if we consider all the factors as I mentioned, that would take care of the subgroup there in each class. But ultimately we have to bring out all the potentiality hidden in the students, mathematical potential. But we have to do the curriculum for different groups. That is my point.
Flexibility, right? Flexibility.
Yes.
Anybody else? Yeah.
I'm Kamal Durai. I work in theoretical computer science, which is related to what was just said. And so there's this question, especially towards the when you come to the higher classes, as to whether we need to have this emphasis on continuous mathematics, or whether we should introduce some discrete mathematics. I feel our present curriculum is much more oriented towards continuous mathematics, because that is where traditional mathematics has come from. Whereas if you are looking at a lot of applications today, then a lot of them use discrete mathematics, which is not that much importance to in the curriculum. So should we be thinking about it as two different subjects, as math being one subject and computer science being one subject, and you do it like this? Or should we change the math curriculum so that it includes more discrete elements? I mean, this is not an easy question for anybody to tackle, but since I work in this area, and I do think that current day applications of mathematics are very much on the discrete side. Should we bring this in, and is this something which this kind of forum should be discussing?
Thank you. Yeah, please. I'm sorry, we'll need to just take two more after this. Yeah.
I'm Kalyani from VIT University. I teach mathematics for engineers. I'm continuing what Dr. Loraya was just talking about. For the higher classes, when we have the curriculum for maybe the 12th standard, 11th and 12th, should there be a nice transition into the college level? Because there is a gap, and when they come to the college, there is a gap. So we need to fill that gap to again continue with the kind of mathematics that we teach. So that gap has to be bridged.
As I said, two more max. There's, she wanted. Yeah, there's yes. He'll be the last.
I feel, we have to give some amount of history, of the mathematical concepts, like how this concept came into existence. We straightly teach calculus to a, 11th standard and 12th standard student, without talking what was the need to actually invent calculus for Newton or for the math geniuses of India. I think this is very important. Without touching that, straight away getting into the concept is not going to help the student, and it's an absolute waste. So that's what I think.
Yeah.
Very good afternoon. I am Tirumurthy from Sham Academy as maths teacher. So there is a various levels of curriculum in IGCSE. So according to the child, they can select the core, extended, additional, or international mathematics. So it's very flexible to the student. So in the meanwhile, the core children comes to the AS and A level, they feel very difficult to understand the concepts. For example, in the core maths, they are learning very less content, so they can't able to compete with the others, those who learned extended or additional mathematics. So they are skipping taking a maths. They are not a part in the mathematics. They are going for another subject. So we have to think about that. Everyone should take a maths subject, because in my class there are 11 students, but only 5 of them choose the maths as a subject. So others are skipping because they learn core in IGCSE.
Thank you. We shall now, I'm sorry, the time. We can discuss it later outside.
Ma'am, actually, I don't know whether a term called mathematical psychology exists or not. I don't know, because I'm not a specialist. But on teaching fractions to that students, a set of students, I found this. For example, if two different denominator fractions we have to add means, the first step we have to take LCM, and then we have to divide that LCM by that denominator, then multiply it by numerator, then we have to add and simplify. So 6 steps it will come to a fraction. So if you take 100 students, for example, if you take stats of 100 students, so first we will tell LCM, of the 50 students, only to the next step, only 50 students will come, because 50 students don't know LCM. So the remaining 50 students, they will drop their shoulders. So the next step, another 25 students will. So on the 6th step, only 10 students will come. So there is a psychology behind that, on which step that will do. So if that psychology is assigned with this curriculum, and if this curriculum is for each and every problem, each and every type of problem, then it will be more useful. That is my point.
So we shall now, if there's any response. Hriday, are you here?
I'm here, but I couldn't hear too well, so if there is anything specific you want me to talk about, I can do that.
Okay, so you just stay around and let me get responses from others. Yeah? Venkatesh, would you like to respond to any point that's so far been up? Can you show me? If there's any point?
I don't have anything specific.
Okay, Dinesh.
I do. I'll take a couple of minutes. They may not throw light on some of the comments or questions that came from here, but they will lend perspective to the discussion. So I kept hearing since the first session about students who are not able to catch up, who are weak within quotation marks, so on and so forth. I'm reminded of this anecdote. It's a joke, really, about a married couple where the gentleman, they'd been married for a long time, and then the husband decides that the wife is becoming hard of hearing. But he prides himself on his scientific attitude, his rational thinking. And he says, I'm not going to conclude that she's becoming hard of hearing without actually going through a rigorous test. So one day, he enters a room where his wife is seated at the far end from the doorway. And at the doorway, he asks, my dear, can you hear me? And he gets no response. So he says, yeah, looks like she is really hard of hearing. But then he moves closer, middle of the room. And he asks again, my dear, can you hear me? Still no response. So he's more and more convinced that she can't hear him. Then he gets really close and says, my dear, can you hear me? And then he hears, darling, that's the third time I said yes. It was the other person who was becoming hard of hearing. I noticed teachers more and more, they look for faults and demerits in a student without reflecting upon themselves. Somewhere in the first session, people talked about teacher training and this and that. I think first and foremost, a teacher must learn to understand that maybe deficiencies lie within themselves. I don't know if teachers even record their own sessions when they teach in a classroom and reflect upon how they went about it. So on. Also, a test is only as good as the person who sets it, So let's not worry too much about whether someone clears a test or not. I am always worried about that. And finally, just remember one thing. It isn't just this game that we're indulging in today is not just about mathematics. It's about knowledge, learning, and enlightening oneself. You don't need to compete with the other bloke. You need to compete with yourself. And nothing is done in isolation. So you can't expect to be teaching maths unless you bring about an all-round awareness about how physics, economics, mathematics, chemistry, everything is connected with everything. You really require an enlightened approach to the whole thing. You want to do something in isolation with maths, it's going to get really tough. And I think somewhere more and more awareness on this matter needs to be made so that people who design curricula look at it in a more holistic way. And why do I say that? Not for chauvinistic reasons, but the Indian tradition of knowledge systems from age 12 onwards was always transdisciplinary, hands-on. And it did not make you compete against the other guy. All those things made a huge difference. That's why India could make such advances. And I'm not being a chauvinist here. I'm talking of facts of history. Maybe curriculum design, teacher training, those things must take such learnings into account.
No, I have a solution to all the problems. If you want to learn, begin to teach. If you want to teach, begin to learn.
I think I've got a couple of reflections on several things, and one is to do with the gentleman that left. He mentioned where's symmetry, and I think where is this beauty, where is the symmetry, where are these big ideas in our curricula? And I think that's something that we don't always show, and we rely on teachers to do that. And they can't do that if they've never met it themselves. So we're now entering this place where teachers that are teaching don't meet that beauty when they're at school. They've learnt it a particular way. And I know myself with the work I do, I'm coming across things and I'm completely, when I go back to being in the classroom, I'm going to be a completely different teacher because I've been given that time to reflect. I've been given that time to research. And if you look at some of the things we write, we go back and we think, I'm never going to do that again. I'm going to do it completely differently. And I used to think I was a reasonably good teacher. My students seemed positive. I think that's the first thing. The second thing links a little bit to what we were talking about this morning and the kind of the purpose of the curriculum. And when you do go out into the world of the work and you do go out into these places, whether you're going to be an academic mathematician or whether you're going to work in an industry, are we speaking to those people about what they prioritise? I had a conversation recently with two academic mathematicians, one a topologist and the other a number theorist, and I said, well, what is it that you think the students that arrive to your classes, what is it that you want them to have? Is it that you want them to have met this and do this and do this? And they weren't concerned particularly with high-level content. They were determined about that idea of a way of thinking, a way of mathematising problems, a way of connecting knowledge. They said they can fill in some of the content. They can do that. What they can't change is they can't change the way of thinking, the openness, the way of trying things and making mistakes and willing to reflect on your work. They can't change that. And I wonder where that is in some curricula. Again, do we rely on teachers to do that? Do we rely on the content of tasks? And the last thing I think is the cultural and historical perspective. I'm fascinated by that, and I've never really had a chance to do that. And I know it's something within our team we're starting to think now, but it's incredibly difficult to access that as somebody who doesn't know much about it. And if there are people in the room who have an interest, I've been learning about columns, and I'd met Rangoli patterns before. I used to use those in my class, but it's only through sharing those, and that's one of the things I think we try to do, and one of the reasons we're here is to learn from you. So if you have some beautiful cultural, historical ways of presenting the mathematics, we're fascinated to hear them, because they do interest children. There's nothing more interesting. I've travelled all over the world, and when I do an assembly for children, I stand in front and say, did you know the area of a rectangle is the same here as it is in Mongolia, as it is in Uganda? They think it's different. They think there's a different formula and you do it in a different way. And when you say to them, we're all studying the same mathematics, we might access it in different ways and experience it and represent it in different ways, but it's the same mathematics. There you go, sorry.
I think one of the things that, when she was speaking, it came to me is that we have to give problems which are either under-specified or over-specified to students. I think that is important. Because when we do that, then students, then they have to make assumptions about things which are not given in the problem. Or it's over-specified, they have to know what to choose. And this becomes very important when they go for jobs and things like that later on. Because in real life, problems are never given exactly like it is in the mathematics book, right? It's never given like that. So that's where they struggle, I think. So somewhere we have to start inculcating in them the ability to sift from the world of data what they need for their specific problem. That has to be introduced.
Yeah, I agree, Parveen. I don't want to take time, but we teach so much about trigonometry, heights, distances. And I keep asking kids if they've ever thought how to find the circumference of the earth or the distance to the moon or the sun, and they're clueless. They're totally clueless because we don't teach them the practical way of going about these things.
Or why it came in.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of what is said, as was said in the first session, is in the NCF, and has tried to be brought out in the first approximation of materials and so on. But I think what we need to think about as we're leaving, among many other questions, is why has what we are saying not worked out? How do the different silos that we are, the different groups, the policymakers, the teachers, the other parts of society, the learners, these are all the different silos. How do they come on the same page is what this is about. And it is really across the curriculum, as is being said. It's not just about mathematics. The issue about discrete versus continuous is an issue that we faced when we were essentially moving class 8 to 9. That's when the formal idea of proof and the formal kind of connection with reals as a number, line in continuity and so on comes, and trying to understand that these are particulars in the larger issue that we need to think about. And it's the teacher who's there in the field who needs to bring in and bridge the gaps and needs to have the confidence, the ability, and the means to bridge that gap. I'll just end on this note for just now. Thank you.
I would request all the members and the chair to be here on the stage. We want to do a little bit of felicitation. Thank you, Madam Chair, and the members of the panel. It was one enriching discussion. The idea is connecting, and that is what we are trying to do. May I request Lynn? Oh, she's already here. To facilitate. Thank you, Lynn. And thank you, Lynn, and thank you very much. You all have been rock stars, I must say.